Welcome back to Nerf Diagnostic and Repair. I'm your host, Captain Xavier, and while I do have a number of blasters that I need to feature on this series, I'm in the middle of my end-of-the-year project that I'm really hoping I will actually get done by the end of the year. It'll probably end up getting posted, midnight on New Year's Eve like Tier was, but hopefully I'll get it done before then and can actually get some decent footage of it in action, assuming it works at all. We will see. But the footage that I'm going to show for this episode was filmed, I don't even know how long ago now. It was a repair job for a friend, SF Edwards. He's also the father of the young lad who operates the Owen tank, and the author of the Spiral War series, which will get mentioned later. And the blaster that we're showing off here is a blaster he built to be a fizz rep of one of the blasters from the book series, which I think is a really cool idea. Unfortunately, it's been so long since I've filmed this, some of the footage has actually gotten lost. The initial diagnostic footage has been lost, which is probably for the best. I was so confused by how he had done it that I think I uttered some disparaging remarks concerning it. But he did some really weird stuff in there which worked, but was strange, and has actually inspired the next episode of Monday Mod Tips, where I'm going to discuss the difference between a parallel circuit and a serial circuit. Because he used serial wiring in a place that we would normally use parallel wiring. Usually when we wire up flywheel cages, even afterburner flywheel cages, we wire them in parallel rather than in serial. And he hadn't, which resulted in him needing to wire two separate battery cages in serial in order to get enough voltage to power that. And it took me a long time to figure out how the thing was even wired and why it was wired that way. And once I finally did, I was able to figure, okay, I see what he did here, and then tear it all out and do it in parallel. Because it is a much simpler and, quite frankly, safer system. And far less likely to burn things out, which is what ended up happening in this one. A bunch of stuff got burned out, probably because there was simply too much voltage going through it on account of it being in serial rather than parallel. I could have that entirely wrong. I'm not an electrician, but I was able to work out that he was using two battery cages that were wired in serial. So he had 6 IMRs in series, and then had the motors wired in series. And so anyway, once I figured all that out, I was able to tear it all out and wire it all back up properly this time, and it ended up working. So as far as I know, it still works. He hasn't contacted me to tell me that it's, caught fire or anything, so... But we're going to pick up where I'd figured out what was going on and had actually started the repairs. Unfortunately, the diagnostic process of trying to figure out what the wiring was in that thing has sadly been lost to time. I don't think I still have the raw footage anywhere, so here you go. Take a look at this thing. This was a battle rifle from the Spiral War trilogy as made by SF Edwards. Alright, so the first thing I'm doing is trying to clean up some of the solders. Make sure they're actually connected correctly. Some of them, like this switch, like I said, wasn't actually soldered at all. It was just twisted through, which is not a good idea because such things come loose and then they quit working. I cleaned up his dremeling a little bit as well because the rev switch was sticking because it wasn't enough clearance. Now there is. I've also removed the mechanical lock on the trigger because I am going to add an electric lock. He had the trigger switch wired to positive going to the battery, straight to the motor, and then negative going through the switch. I'm switching it so that the rev trigger first hits the firing switch and then goes onto the flywheels, and so you're completing the pusher motor, the conveyor belt motor, with positive that's coming off of the rev switch. So you can pull the trigger, but it won't do anything unless the rev trigger is pulled. So you have an electric lock instead of a mechanical lock. So we are going to need to redo some of the wiring. First of all, we're going to need to cut this wire. Still not even sure where that goes. Okay, hypothetically, we should now have the pusher motor properly rewired. But to test, we will need to put batteries in it. First, I suppose we should check and see if any of the motors still work at all. Since for all I know, he burned it up, everything up entirely with his Missigash setup here. Not so much. Those motors are toast. Which isn't surprised because there was a dart stuck in there, and with that much voltage, I am not remotely surprised that they burned up. So, those will need to get replaced. I did not know the Hyperfire's stock flywheel cage is canted. Wonder what happens when you go from a canted flywheel cage to a straight flywheel cage in series. Probably nothing good. Alright. Now, we redo the flywheel cages, and I'm not gonna do it the way he did it. We're going to eliminate the front battery cage altogether and simply wire it up normally, as it were. Alright. As far as I can tell, it's working. There were a lot of internal screws missing, so I'm putting those back in. Mostly motor mount screws. Alright, so let's recap this. The primary failure were the first set of flywheel motors, which he says are some kind of aftermarket. I don't know what they are exactly, but they were completely fried. There was a dart that jammed in there, and then they must have just burned up trying to clear the jam. So I replaced them with just stock wheels. These ones are the same motors, so I believe they've got a faster RPM than stock motors, which you need in an afterburner setup anyway. And so that should be better now, because before they were identical and it really wouldn't do anything except make a lot of noise. But that has now actually become a functioning afterburner. Hopefully, it'd be hilarious if these ones are now actually the more powerful, faster ones, because, like I said, I don't know what these motors actually are. I then also pretty much completely redid the wiring. His soldering was atrocious. I don't know if he just didn't have a good soldering iron. A lot of my early solders were atrocious because I neither had a good soldering iron, and I didn't actually know how to properly use it. So now that I have both of those issues dealt with, I can solder much cleaner. Still pretty ugly. But we wired it so that it now goes battery positive to rev switch to pusher switch, as well as to the flywheels, and then pusher switch to the pusher motor, and the negative just goes to all of the negatives on all of the motors. The motors are no longer in serial, they are now in parallel. So there is only the one battery source. I eliminated the front battery cage wiring entirely. Hypothetically, the way he had it, he had the batteries in serial and then he had the motors in serial. So the batteries in serial meant he was running 6 IMRs, which is a lot of voltage. But then he had the motors in serial, so they were drawing twice as much voltage altogether, and so that's why they didn't burn out instantaneously. But he wasn't actually gaining anything by that, because he's drawing from all the batteries at the same current. So it wouldn't make the batteries last longer, and it wasn't giving him any more power. It was just an unnecessary, complicated wiring setup, which was just not good. So it's been eliminated to just a simple Hyperfire rewire, as well as afterburners, which just means wiring them in serial as well. The front now acts basically as battery storage, I suppose. You could just store extra batteries in there. If he really wanted to, he could add in wiring to put in a switch that would switch between the battery trays. So you could have a set of batteries, and when this set gets low, flip the switch, and now it draws from this one. And that would actually be useful. That would be a functional use for 2 battery trays, similar to how I have backup batteries in IRE, that there's just a switch that I can flip between them. So yeah, it still runs off of 3 IMRs, which is going to burn these motors out quickly. The fact that there's 2 sets of them and that there's a pusher motor means it will burn them out less quickly because there isn't quite as much going through them. But this switch will probably eventually go. The wiring is good. So if he wanted to, I recommended going to Michelle 2's and Fang revamps and wiring it for 2S LiPo, because that would give you a proper afterburner flywheel cage set up, and they are both 2S. He would need to replace this switch. This switch is good. The red switch that he put in there is a high current switch. This one would need to get replaced, which wouldn't be too hard, really. It would just be a matter of dremeling it out and hot gluing it in. And yeah, then he would have a pretty wicked blaster, actually. I think it's really neat looking. I like the design that he came up with. The integration work could use a little bit more work, obviously. A little bit more sanding here before painting, just to clean up all those lines, unless you were going for a cobbled together look, which I don't remember what the nature of the blaster was in the story. At least one of the people who sent me a design said that they were going for a cobbled together from other blasters look, and so he intentionally didn't clean up a lot of the integration work, which is a clever way of justifying it, I feel. Alright, we're going to put this thing back together and see if it actually shoots. I mean, it makes noise and the motors spin, but that's not proof of anything. Well, it makes noise. Let's see if it actually fires anything. Got a hair trigger. I kind of like that. Here we go. Sure enough, it shoots. All right, the takeaway here: don't make your wiring more complicated than it needs to be, and switch to LiPo as soon as you can. So yeah, like I said, weird wiring in this thing, and I will go over the differences between wiring motors and batteries in serial and wiring them in parallel, and when you would want to do one over the other. There are times where you want to wire things in serial as opposed to parallel, or in series. I'm not sure if it's serial or series. Once again, not an electrician. It's probably actually series rather than serial. And I'm sure, since there are people who, know the difference, and they will have commented before getting to this part of the video, in which case they will get snark. Snark, I tell you. Watch the video before commenting. Anyway, yeah, I will figure out what the proper term is, and then I will make a video on the differences, because they are significantly different, and there are ways that you can use the 2 different kinds of circuits to achieve all sorts of interesting things. So I will do at least a basic video on that, possibly 2 if it turns out there's more information than I was expecting. We'll see. Anyway, I hope all of you are having a fabulous winter holy day celebrations for whatever days in winter you guys hold holy, and I will talk to you all later. Thank you for watching.